3 by Eli Pope. Narrated by Paul J. McSorley. Featuring voice talent from Drew Blood, Olivia Steele, Geoff Sturtevant, Felipe Ojeda, Beatles Fanise, Tales of September, and Ponchmonster Studios.
Hey, Barbie,
Karen whispered.
don't be obvious, but see that guy with stubble on his face and olive skin walking up towards our door?
Yeah? So what?
So what? So that guy is a complete psychopath. That's so what?
Karen looked up as the glass entrance door to Dr. J. Niles' Doctor of Psychological Mental Health office opened and quickly shushed her new co-worker before she could say anything. She cleared her throat before greeting the man with the dark, chilling eyes and safety glasses sitting perched up on top of his slick-back black mid-length hair that gave him the appearance of either a hitman or a machinist in some kind of shop. Karen could never decide which.
Good afternoon, Mr.
She wasn't certain which personality he was today, although relatively certain it was Rob Young by his mannerisms and the way he was dressed.
Young. Rob Young.
He answered.
And you are... let me think. Karen. Karen Wimberly.
Rob hesitated a moment and then quickly smiled with a big Cheshire cat grin.
Yes, I'm certain now. Karen Wimberly. Your name rolls right off the tongue.
His smile morphed into a hint of question before continuing.
And who might this young sweetheart's name be?
His eyes slowly scanned over to Karen's new helper.
I haven't seen you around the doc's office yet, and that's a shame, really.
His dark brown eye winked. Karen looked over to Barbie sheepishly and then continued.
This is our new receptionist and assistant. Dr. Niles hired her yesterday and is having me train. Barbie Masters is her name.
Barbie looked over at Karen and bumped Karen's leg abruptly underneath the counter but turned and greeted Rob Young with a polite smile.
Hello, Mr. Young. It's nice to meet you. I'll just start off by asking for your insurance card.
Right to business, huh? Not much of a small talk girl, are you, Barbie Masters?
He retorted as he pulled out his wallet from what appeared to be dark gray work pants. It was long and worn with a chain attached, like a biker's wallet. His jacket hung open just enough for Barbie to notice a company name on his shirt, Alpine Mountain Custom Cabinetry. She made a quick mental note as she was getting odd vibes from Mr. Young, a feeling that he may just be looking through her clothes as if she were just an item, imagining her flesh hidden inside. She felt fear and yet was for some odd reason aroused, but she shook her assessment of him off. Seeing his hand move forward, she reached for the insurance card, which he held out just far enough away that she was forced to lean forward, pushing her breasts together and forcing her cleavage to open her shirt enough that his eyes couldn't help being caught staring like a turkey peeking over a log downward to her top, passing her eyes like obliviously running a stop sign. Barbie snatched the card from his hand in a hurried fashion as his thumb pushed forward and slightly brushed her fingertips, bringing on instant chills that ran up her arm. Barbie's thoughts stumbled, and she cleared her throat a bit to break the attention away from what she deemed certain to be noticeable by Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Young. You can take a seat right over there, and I'll give this back to you when you're called to go back to Mr. Niles' office for your session.
Yeah, my session.
He grinned.
Like I'm buying a fucking car today and Dr. Niles is my goddamn loan officer ready to spread those payments out for easy affordability.
He blurted out in an awkward, sudden mood change. Rob turned sharply and almost stomped over to where he sat solidly in a leather chair directly across from the two girls, Barbie and Karen, staring at them without regard. For at least 5 uncomfortable minutes later that felt like a decade, Dr. Niles finally stepped out and spoke 5 monotone words.
You can come back now.
Barbie spoke out as Rob began to walk past her toward the psychiatrist.
Here's your insurance card back, sir.
He took it and looked down at it, and then his face suddenly sharpened as he threw it back across the countertop.
This isn't my card, you stupid bitch. It's not even close to my name.
Excuse me, Mr. Young?
Barbie questioned with a timid tone, eyes looking back like a puppy hoping not to be scolded. Rob shook his head in disgust.
You must be new here, babe. My name is Carlos. Carlos Moon, not Rob Young. Rob Young is a pretty boy who thinks he's the shit and all that. I ain't no fucking pretty boy.
He sneered.
I'm a member of the Escorpinos Asesinos, the most dangerous gang in LA. Remember that, bitch.
And he continued on towards the doctor's office, looking back one more time with a scowl before rounding the corner of the hallway, his chain dangling from his pocket, clinking as he strutted. Karen turned to see Barbie's face changing from angered red to shocked white before quietly speaking.
I told you he was a psycho. Not everyone draws Carlos Moon out as quick as you did.
Are all of Dr. Niles' patients as scary as that guy, Karen?
Carlos is the worst that I've seen so far, but you never know when he's going to show up. I like Sinjin Franck or Izabella Montego much better. Carlos sends frozen chills throughout my entire body. Not good ones at all.
Barbie's face morphed into a question as her color came back to normal.
Sinjin or Izabella? Just how many personalities are trapped in that one frightening package? A Mexican and a female? What all nationalities are housed inside that wackadoodle? I would think that they would all be swarmy white males that carry their cigarettes rolled up tight in their black t-shirts and gray tactical slacks.
I know. I've heard Dr. Niles on the phone with other colleagues. And I'm not sure how he even knows exactly how dangerous Rob or Carlos could be. Or for that matter, how many others are still hidden within. I think Sinjin and Izabella are relatively safe. Sinjin is the class clown. And Izabella, she's living the part, object of all their affections. Damn Rob for letting that bitch squat inside his head.
Karen sighed at the mention of Izabella, likely from jealousy.
Carlos Moon?
She spoke his name, and you'd swear the room sucked in a deep breath around you.
Carlos Moon scares the fuck out of me. Pardon my language. I think he owns evil in his soul.
I stroked my beard stubble as I followed Niles to his office. I was here not because I felt the need or desire. The courts had me keep these appointments. All because of the incident at Walmart. It wasn't my fault that bitch had no control over herself, let alone those little rug monsters that likely each had a daddy they'd never know. Who shops in fucking pajamas to begin with? I know I was innocent. I had my work clothes on because I held a friggin' job and was buying the things I needed for the evening. She bumped into me with her snot-nosed human shih tzus. I thought to myself,
The ugliest one made me drop my bottle of tequila.
I said aloud before I realized.
Doc Niles turned back abruptly.
Oh, shut up, Carlos. You who never does or says anything to antagonize or spur conflict. Bet you said something to one of her kids that brought it all on, and now here we are because you think you're such a badass.
Kiss my ass, Rob. My little muchacho. You always cause shit wherever you go.
Guys, calm down. Why do I always have to be the voice of reason when you two start it?
Izabella asked. Hysterical laughter suddenly roared from Rob's mouth with no restraint. But it was Sinjin who was the outrageous laughing hyena.
Izabella, you are never the voice of reason, you crazy twat. You're just the one with the vagina that Rob and Carlos want to get into. You wiggle your ass and think that's gonna solve it all. Well, guess what, honey biscuits? It only stirs testosterone.
Guys, gal, just stop it for a minute. Let's wait until we all get seated before we start this chaotic sideshow. Everyone will get a chance to state their views, one at a time. And as the adults we all are,
Dr. Niles stated.
Listen to the doctor, boys. He knows best. He's an educated Harvard man.
Oh, shut up, Izabella. You just want to go for a poke on his desk.
Carlos spoke up.
I'd watch that.
Rob chimed in.
Better than pleasuring myself to videos on Porn Kitty with all you sickos watching.
Rob snickered.
Ew. That's disgusting.
Izabella spat out.
enough!
Dr. Niles directed.
If we can't keep a decorum in this office, well, Rob, since you're the man in charge of this three-ring circus, I'll call Judge Heller and tell him we are getting nowhere. Is that what you want?
There was silence in the room as Rob stretched out onto the leather chaise lounge.
How much did you pay for this chair, Niles?
First off, it's Dr. Niles. Secondly, what does that have to do with solving your personal dilemmas? This is why we are here, isn't it? Weekly sessions to help settle and solve your issues, and dealing with your inner conflicts with Carlos and Izabella.
So, Doc Niles, I don't even get any credit here? What am I? Chopped liver?
Sinjin quizzed and then cackled loudly. Rob's facial expressions and body language changed drastically and without any outward appearing effort as each entity took over Rob's body in their individual control and talked. It truly was a three-ring circus. Dr. Niles had called it correctly, albeit a tinge unprofessional.
Rob, could you tell me how you felt this week and how you dealt with your inner turmoil with Carlos and Izabella?
Again with Rob and Carlos and Isa-fucking-Bella?
Sinjin sighed heavily before letting a brief giggle slip. He took a deep breath.
You do know that I live here too, Dr. Niles. I have feelings. It's not like I enjoy jerking off while these two fight over the only woman who will have any of the three of us if we just tell her we love her. I have needs too. I have feelings. Sure, I laugh wildly out of nowhere, but maybe, just maybe, it's the only way I can get any attention at all here in this woman's world.
Sinjin, I'm sorry. Sometimes you're so quiet that it's easy to let your needs and questions fall to the side. I do apologize for that.
Dr. Niles picked up his pencil and put the lead to his paper and began writing.
What are you writing, Doc? Excuses for Rob and Carlos so they can blame everything on me?
Sinjin wailed out in uncontrollable laughter. And then silence. Sinjin suddenly appeared as if he were a frightened kitten in the corner before he cried out again in crazy laughter.
Sinjin, get control of yourself. Let me talk to Rob now.
The doctor responded, and his eyes spoke with more firmness than his words just had.
So, Doc Niles, I suppose you see what my world is here. I live in this internal circus with no ringmaster to keep control.
Sinjin quietly leaned in closer and spoke with dramatic flair.
Carlos is the bear who rides the tricycle on the tightrope until he falls and becomes a mad grizzly. And Rob is the guy who likes to crack his loud whip at the tigers that surround him.
His voice became sultry.
While Izabella is the bearded woman who wants to prove she's a lady by flashing her tits to show she is a feminine body with estrogen.
And where do you fit in, Sinjin? What is your role in this drama-filled world inside Rob's head?
Rob's head? Why do you say that? Maybe, just maybe, they're the ones invading the perimeters of my head. My circus. My 3 rings of confusion.
Sinjin questioned in a serious tone before busting out into another laughing tirade. And then there was an uncomfortable silence while Dr. Niles waited to see who would pop in next.
Is it like this every time Mr. Young comes in?
Barbie questioned. Karen looked up and over the top of her computer as the corners of her lips began to turn upward. Her eyes glistened as her smile broadened, but suddenly a seriousness fell over her like a thick fog rolling in from the morning pond's surface. She began to speak, attempting to push words from her lips that hadn't yet been born from thought. They became stuck, and the effort to push caved suddenly, as if the endeavor were too great.
Are you okay, Karen? Your color changed.
Karen's head dropped as if a curtain of shame came rolling in from each side of the stage they sat.
I loved Rob.
What? You loved him?
Her mouth dropped open like a trap door.
Shut the front fucking door.
She let slip from her mouth before thinking. She looked around the waiting room to make sure no one was there to hear her faux pas.
Yes.
Was the simple answer she pushed out like a puppy pinches out a small turd and then turned her head away as if she had never said a word. The puppy off to play now.
I don't see it.
Barbie softly spoke as she wheeled her chair around from her side of the desk in closer, gaining Karen's attention again as to be able to give her some comfort.
Do you want to talk about it?
Barbie continued. Karen looked back up and was attempting to push words out that were again tangled in her tongue as the sounds of the 3-ring circus continued down the hall behind the doctor's closed door of room 3, the treatment room.
I can't. Not right now. Not while Rob is in there with Dr. Niles. Not in that room.
The room? What the hell does that mean?
Karen's demeanor morphed into a much different tone immediately. Hushed, pained, and full of what appeared to be scattered emotions. She leaned into Barbie and whispered,
There are things that you don't yet know about. J. Niles and room 3. Hurtful things. Evil, perverted, depraved things.
Well, this sounds very clandestine and spooky. Nothing like getting totally weirded out on my first day. Next, you're gonna tell me that there are experiments going on like Dr. Frankenstein.
Barbie's expression immediately showed a new concern at the absence of immediate denial from Karen. The look on Karen's face was as if someone pulled the sheet off of her, leaving her lying naked and very vulnerable in her bed, missing any sign of letting her know she was only kidding.
Are we in some kind of danger here? I mean, Rob already gave me the willies, and Carlos. My God.
The sound of a door opening in the distance around the corner, voices quickly growing louder behind them before halting to an abrupt hush before rounding the corner.
I want to talk about this later.
She gave Karen the stink eye.
I'm serious, Karen, or I'm getting up, walking out, and never coming back. I was looking for a job when I found this one.
Karen nodded as Rob and the doctor rounded the corner, both with emotionless blank stares on their faces, both hiding the secrets left behind that door back and around the corner and down at the end of the hall on the left.
I think we've rounded a corner, Rob.
He smiled and chortled at his feeble, tiny attempt at humor.
It feels right. What say you?
Dr. Niles asked in a very nonchalant changing tone following his failed humor, which painstakingly lacked any footing taken hold.
Sure, Doc. I feel more grounded now. I'm cured, you might say.
Rob replied with a monotone voice that lacked the same charisma he had come in with. He just smiled as he peeked around to the side where Karen and Barbie obviously were trying to look as if they were busy and didn't notice either him or the doctor.
Your ladies look like two little kitty cats that just swallowed a single canary, Doc.
His smile turned intense just before he winked at the two girls and blew an intimidating kiss towards them. A deeper, gruff voice interrupted Rob's, coming from the same lips as Rob's appearance morphed dramatically, drastically changing to meet and match the new tone.
I'll be seeing you soon, Barbie doll.
And then his lips mouthed the words, "very soon," in an unheard but very loud, silent voice. The door closed behind him. Them. And by them, Barbie felt as if all three men and Izabella had just left the building. In Elvis fashion. Thank you very much. Dr. Niles turned, facing his assistants.
I'll be checking out for the rest of the day, ladies. Do you need anything before I go?
His eyes appeared bluer than earlier, brighter, but in a darker kind of way, Karen thought.
We'll be fine, Doctor.
She stuttered before catching herself, not wanting to cause any confrontation.
Any specific message you want me to give, if anyone calls for you?
Karen asked. J. Niles lifted his hand and brushed it over his short, groomed beard before answering.
Just tell them something's come up and I should be back in the office in the morning.
His eyes appeared to be very relaxed, without the tension one would expect to see after dealing with such a wild schizophrenic patient as Rob. Karen faked a smile and gave him a thumbs up. The moment came when the door closed in the back and the sound of a car motor starting up was heard, signaling that Dr. Niles had left the building. Barbie's eyes opened wide with a look that spoke for demands of being brought up to speed about this very odd doctor and his room 3.
Well, spill it, Karen, or my ass is out the door like a hoarder at a BOGO flea market with a purse full of hundies just waiting to buy a truckload of shit that will never be unboxed again.
Meanwhile, back at Rob's place.
My hand brushed against my knee softly in a slightly seductive touch. I knew my eyes likely appeared as two orbs swallowed with two pods full of puppy love. I always enjoy imagining my time with Karen after seeing her. Picturing the two of us sitting on the same couch all those months ago after my second or third consultation with Doc Niles. The forced consultations, I remind myself. I'd been upset about the whole arrangement until I opened that door the first time and saw her. Her bright, warm smile, that blonde hair. I'd always found myself craving dark, brunette-haired women before, but Karen changed all of that in that one shared moment, bumping into each other's eyes. Yeah, I'm a true romantic, hidden behind this facade of a tough macho male.
I saw her first, Robbie Bobby boy. You always seem to forget that part of the equation.
His voice changed into the gruffness he so hated hearing.
You forced me out of that equation, though, didn't you? My body, my rules back then. Your fucking words. Until I showed you, that is.
He laughed in an evil, repetitive chatter that sounded like a big cougar purring. And then the purring stopped on a dime.
Carlos, we've gone over this so many times before. It was never you that Karen fell for. You were never in the picture. Hell, you don't even have a fucking job. How could you even afford to take her out? No car, no money, not even a fucking pot to piss in without me. I asked Carlos with more than just a hint of being perturbed with him, even here interrupting my mental reenactment of seduction between Karen and me. I hadn't invited him over, let alone into my humble home. No, he just pushed his way inside my head and into my life. He was like the IRS, and once he got in, you just can't ever chisel him back out. Leeches, milking you for every frickin' thing you own until you're one of the masses of homeless, swallowing any speck of pride you kept hidden away until you held up that poorly spelled sign. Hungary. Anything helps.
A loud laugh rang out.
Ay, Dios mío. A humble home? Don't you mean your hovel? It's a fucking hoarder's nest in here. What did you even have in all these boxes and piles of shit everywhere?
A female's voice broke out from the middle of the room where only Rob sat on the one cleared spot in the middle of the couch, boxes and bags folding in on him.
Well, I try to keep up with cleaning, Carlos, honey. But you see what I have to contend with. Machine parts are just plain old crap in most of these boxes that are far too heavy for me to manage on my own. And where should I put them anyway?
Rob held up his hand abruptly and then softly touched his own face as if he were a puppet, his strings being pulled by Izabella.
You saw my swollen eye from the last time I asked, and was then told how I'd accidentally bumped into the cabinet corner.
Rob's hand formed into a fist holding a handkerchief, moving it back and forth as if wiping tears into the invisible wadded cloth.
What am I to do? I try. Lord knows how I try.
Izabella, darling.
A maniacal laugh broke the conversation up between she, Carlos, and Rob. Sinjin cackled loudly without restraint.
To sit and listen to this bullshit is just... simply fucking maddening.
Sinjin followed with a sickly giggle.
People would think you three were Looney Tunes if you were to be heard. If you still had neighbors, that is. If your constant domestic skirmishes hadn't run them all off.
Sinjin continued, making a sucking sound as he tried to refill his lungs he had just emptied in his uncontrolled laughter.
Hey, I have an idea. It's a brilliant one, too.
I already feel uncomfortable about this, guys.
Izabella quietly spoke as she pulled her arms in and tightly wrapped her chest in her own hands as if to protect herself.
The last time Sinjin had a good idea.
She shook uncontrollably in a feared reflective memory moment.
You all decided to participate in that awful threesome. We all remember how wrong that went, don't we?
And you were a late show, if I remember right.
Sinjin smiled before breaking into another laughing fit.
Just 3 guys in a naked man fest.
And then the living room went uncomfortably quiet, as if the memory suddenly sank in all at once.
But I still love you guys.
Izabella said, very hushed.
But it was quite the spectacle.
Seriously, guys?
Sinjin spoke with a firmness.
I don't like Doc Niles. Do you? Do any of you?
He waited quietly. No burst of nervous laughter. No needling from any of the others. Just a vacant stare searching for a reaction from someone. Anyone. Probably all of us saw the seriousness in Sinjin's face for the first time. Ever. His eyes began to glaze over before tears began to peek out from underneath his lids.
Carlos's gruff voice sliced through the silenced hush like a heated butter knife. It was as if they were all thinking the exact same 2 words when Izabella spoke to them first with hesitation.
Room 3.
Her voice trailed off. Carlos quickly looked up at the ceiling before chasing Isabella's same sentence built with the same 2 words.
Room 3.
But it came off his lips hushed instead of flooded with the anger that normally reverberated within his tone. Rob's mouth only mocked the 2 words, unable to push them to the point of breaking the barrier of speech. He tried twice, but the sound fell short of breaking loose from his mouth other than the silent movement of his lips' unsuccessful effort.
I've never fucking seen that.
Sinjin said in shock.
Did you guys see that? Seriously, did any of you see that? Our fearless host just lacked even an echo.
Fuck you, Sinjin. Room 3. Room 3. Room 3.
And as Rob defiantly repeated the obviously pained words from his mouth, he leaned forward and then fell from the couch onto the floor, his elbows landing with a loud thud on top of the coffee table surface. Trash and whiskey bottles tumbled to the floor like a city's high-rise towers crumbling to the ground, an earthquake rumbling silently underneath their feet until the scattered debris crashed onto the hardwood floor.
Room fucking 3.
spoken with a finality. Rob's hands lifted from the table and quickly wrapped in a tight hug around himself, his fingers almost stretched to the point of grasping each other from each hand around to his back. Izabella wailed out in a cry.
I love you, Robbie. I won't let anything bad happen to you anymore. I'm sorry, baby boy. I'm so sorry.
Tears flooded Rob's eyes as his sobs came in waves of heaving sighs in a tide of emotions overtaking him.
I'm sorry, Robbie. I didn't know what he was doing. I promise, I didn't know.
Isabella's voice attempted to calm, overwhelmed and wet with emotions. She had obviously held this need for expression inside for a long time. Her sympathy flooded the room in a wash of female emotion as her hands remained locked around her Robbie's chest. There wasn't another word heard from Carlos or Sinjin, except for a quiet mutter barely heard between them. Neither even knew who spoke it.
We should kill that motherfucking doctor,
Sinjin answered.
I'm all in.
And a silence surrounded the four of them instead of the usual crazy laughter spilling from Sinjin's mouth.
We need a plan.
Rob spoke up first, breaking the hush in the room.
I'll provide the implement of death.
I'll seduce the asshole. One last time.
Izabella spoke in an embarrassed whisper.
I'll gladly kill that gringo. I'll take royal pleasure in crushing every bone in his rotten carcass, and then I'll sever his carotid artery, smearing its red over every wall in a masterpiece of horror.
The loud, gruff Hispanic voice trilled every R in every syllable of the sentence.
I'll be the cleaner that comes in after a hit and makes it look like an accident.
Sinjin's laugh broke free and loud. Karen looked up from her computer when she saw movement from the corner of her vision. Barbie looked up about the same time.
Oh, shit.
Barbie spoke quietly.
Has it been a month already?
Yes, ma'am. Time for the monthly treatment plan.
Karen said as she looked up from her appointment calendar, appearing lost in a quick reflective memory.
Who do you think it will be today?
Barbie asked. Karen watched as the hand pulled the door open. In a hushed voice, she said,
Oh shit, it's Carlos Moon. I'll handle this check-in, Barb.
As the man walked up to the counter with a hint of intention, his eyes darted back and forth. These were facial tics Karen had never noticed before. The patient's mouth appeared stiffly locked, his tongue pushing out on the interior of his cheeks, first one side and then the other.
Good morning. Carlos?
She asked. With a gruffness, the man answered.
Rob Young to see Doctor Niles. Karen?
Oh, I'm sorry. You reminded me of someone else. I'll check you in and call you in a few minutes. The doctor is wrapping up with another patient and will be finished shortly.
The man, who moved rather differently than the last visit, meandered over to a chair that was about as far from his usual seat as possible. Karen took notice and glanced over to Barbie as if to point this fact out. He seemed very different today. Different in a scary way. Not that his personality didn't always cause a nervous chill to trail through her veins upon his walking up to the counter, but today seemed even different. He seemed almost robotic in his movements. But she sloughed the thought off and continued working on her computer. It was a quiet morning on the schedule, which would make the day go by very slowly. Karen looked over at Barbie and stated that the patient and doctor would soon be in treatment room 3 and that this would be a final session so she could file paperwork into the billing program. Carlos's ears perked at the stated room 3. He had been eavesdropping as he watched the two reception women's eyes go back and forth between each other. It felt as if they were scheming or hiding something. He didn't like the feeling he was getting. Paranoia never felt comfortable, even though he wore it like a heavy sweater often. He was beginning to feel defensive, maybe even on the verge of manic, sitting in the waiting room just wondering if he too would be ending up in treatment room 3 again. He had come alone today. He had made the other 3 stay home. After all, he had business to take care of. He had told Rob he was going to go today and use Rob's name so as not to tip anyone off of the plan they had all hatched. Carlos asked that Rob, Sinjin, and Izabella think pleasant thoughts today while he was gone, just before he pulled the door closed.
When I return, things will be very different. I promise. Resolved.
Those were Carlos's last words as Sinjin winked at him and smiled without laughter. Rob just sat stoic on the couch and remained silent, having already talked about the plan to death. Izabella hugged Carlos, knowing this was the day. Squeezing him closely to her was an action she hadn't performed in quite some time. Not since Rob and he had fought over her. Not since that odd and very disturbing day they shared in the bedroom. An act that almost ruined everything. An act not far from the treatments in room 3. The hug stirred memories from their pasts, and now Izabella almost wished she had not hugged Carlos. But today would bring redemption for them all. Freedom from ever having to go back to Dr. Niles' room 3. Carlos promised that none of them would have to suffer J. Niles' perversions ever again. No more painful injections, no more unwanted sexual activities, no more uncomfortable touches, no more Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, no more of bad Uncle J memories playing doctor-patient experimentations as if he were some perverted child playing doctor in the basement with siblings. Carlos held the cure, the prescription for ending it all. Life would be very different when he returned. Normal? Maybe. Hopefully. Carlos's leg was beginning to feel cold and stiff. He had read about some of the possible symptoms from the kind of injection treatments the doctor was giving them. The injections Dr. Niles had told them would help them understand why they all shared one body. But Carlos always felt it was bullshit. The injections only numbed him and stole his energy and intention to fight back when the doctor forced him to do what repulsed him. He wasn't sure why Rob had continued therapy here other than it being demanded by the courts, but he was damn sure going to end them today. The one and only thing Room 3 had done was open the 4 of them up to the fact they were all in this together. There was no one and only in charge. They were each 4 individuals, even if they did share the same body and mind, and those injections were just fucking things up, making everything more complicated than it had to be. Carlos knew he was the only one able to square up with Dr. Niles, and the item in his pocket from home would soon prove it. A gun would have been so much easier and quicker, but where would the fun be in that? As he sat in the vacant waiting room, the 2 girls busy chatting with each other and paying him no attention, he slid his hand into his jacket pocket and touched the cold steel blade with his fingers. It felt familiar. It felt good, powerful, and final. His grip felt comfortable as his fingers wrapped tightly around its cool handle. He had used it to slice turkey, debone chicken, and slice brisket and different cuts of meat many, many times. Dr. Niles would be no different than preparing the meat for a meal like he had done all the time before. He looked back up and over to the ladies as if he had suddenly feared they could hear his thoughts like Rob or Sinjin or Izabella were able to. They appeared to be busy amongst themselves, so his worries were quelled even though the tension remained tight in his neck and shoulders. A random thought suddenly raced across Carlos's brain.
Mierda. What about those ladies? Nobody brought them up in the plan. I can't just leave them here. They would certainly hear what was happening,
he told himself. Carlos's eyes glanced back up to them, making sure they still held no clue of what he was thinking. He knew Rob would immediately be aware of his actions when he walked back through the front door if God forbid, he killed Karen.
I don't want to do it, but if I don't, but Rob would kill me if I did. He still thinks he loves her, and without her, he'll want my Izabella. My beautiful Izabella. I can't have that. I'd have to kill him too.
Carlos suddenly sat up abruptly. It must have created noise because both Karen and the other woman's heads lifted up, their eyes focused on him.
Are you okay, Rob?
Karen asked.
Why is she calling me Rob? Oh yeah, I told her that's who I was. I am. What the fuck? Whatever. Just keep your shit until you get to the dock. Just keep telling yourself. I continued keeping my eyes on the ladies and playing out different scenarios of how this whole thing would go down. I was a badass amigo at one time. Why was this affecting me like this? I owned a black heart. But then, my black heart skipped its first beat. Ever.
Carlo, I mean Rob Young. Dr. Niles is ready to see you.
Karin's voice had never been so piercing as it was just then. My legs quivered, and I clenched and then released the handle of my future within the grip of my aching fingers. I pulled my hand from my coat pocket and pushed on the arms of the chair until I stood straight up.
Hello, Mr. Young. How are we doing today?
Dr. Niles asked as he motioned me to come his way.
You look like a treatment will be the answer to what you need this afternoon.
He smiled with what others may see as a warm gesture, but I knew what evil debauchery was truly encased within it. There was no warm calm or healing feelings held in his well-practiced erroneous formality. I just hoped he didn't sense what his future was soon to be once behind the closed door of room 3. The outcome would be very distinctively different from what his normality had been. I fought between the shakiness of my nerves and the overwhelming urge to laugh out loud, hiding the knowledge of what had been laid out in plans. I glanced at Karen as I walked behind the good doctor, knowing what I would have to do upon exiting this hell, which was about to fall like the Alamo did in a blood-soaked battle. As the doctor opened the door to room 3, ushering me in as if I were to be his willing date for the afternoon, I felt Sinjin enter and push me out from the shell I was in seconds earlier. Fell from my lips with an unrestrained ferociousness that certainly echoed throughout the hallway to the reception area up front before the door slammed shut.
I'm gonna watch you suffer. Carlos gonna chop you up today,
sang Sinjin in a maniacal operatic voice the likes no one had ever heard from him as he continued.
A plan was hatched, and you will pay!
Sinjin's eyes wide open with a grin wider than the Mississippi River.
Slash and slice in a bright red spray!
Sinjin! You ignorant asshole!
Rob yelled at the top of his lungs.
What in fuck's sake are you doing? You don't divulge the package's content before he opens his gift!
Rob cried out.
Oh my God, look at him!
Izabella screamed in a sharp, piercing voice.
It's not the doctor!
She warned. Dr. Niles' eyes darkened as his arms bulged, his chest puffed out. He suddenly appeared strangely bigger, more muscled, and meaner.
You bitches want to play with Miguel?
Shot a deep question veiled in a dark Hispanic gang slang.
Cause Miguel has been waiting for this. Miguel, he likes to play rough, especially with little bitches who think they can make plans he don't like. He gonna stomp you like the miniature cucarachas.
Rob swore he heard the sound of a Spanish guitar being strummed to the sound of boots stomping on a wooden floor just before Carlos called out.
Let's dance, Miguel.
And his hand went inside his jacket pocket and came out gripping a sharp 7-inch carving knife.
It seems Rob and I are not the only ones who share their shells with another. Or 3.
The door flew open and 2 faces stood staring in shock.
Rob?
Karen questioned with a worried, pleading look. Dr. Niles, or Miguel as it may be, and Carlos sidestepped around the room. Carlos quickly stepping towards the other, jabbing his blade towards his opponent's chest, missing, but slicing their wrist as he pulled his hand back. It sent a shooting stream of red that splashed onto his face. Karen screamed.
No! Stop this!
But the 2 men continued moving around in circles as the doctor's eyes appeared to be searching for something, likely a weapon to defend himself. Mexican music continued to fill Carlos's head as he moved his free hand and the one gripping the blade in dramatic choreographed maneuvers, attempting to hypnotize his opponent's eyes with movement. There were moments of hushed silence mixed with female screams as Carlos would dive suddenly, lurching towards the man who appeared to be J. Niles but had talked as if he were another amalgamation of an entity other than himself. The dance of the imminent doctor's demise continued. Blood continued to be spattered across the stark white room, painting the floor in tiny trails of droplets and smears as their feet slid across the linoleum. The entire scene was beautiful in a way. The movement, the color, the dramatic tension melded with energy. If it were only a Broadway production of West Side Story, instead of a life and death battle between two obviously very mentally ill souls ensconced in a strong disagreement, it would be considered a blockbuster. The doctor's eyes shot as wide open as possible when Carlos's blade finally found its target in his stomach. His searching hands instinctively drew to the small hole in his white shirt, now growing redder by the second, pooling until the fabric could absorb no more as it streamed down his leg, his eyes flickering in confusion of what just happened. Doc's body quickly began responding to the internal assault, while his face painted a confused look of what could possibly be happening. Carlos sensed the effect his blade had perpetrated onto his nemesis and suddenly acknowledged his unwavering thirst for revenge on all the dirty deeds the doctor had been performing on him and his cohorts all these past months. They had all been his sex mannequins, drugged and manipulated into serving his every perverted sexual whim. They were his unpaid whores, and this thought drove him to dive full force in for the kill. Carlos's hand holding the knife became a blurred fury, repeatedly stabbing and slicing his teetering victim's body like a painter, slashing his paintbrush in a wild flurry of splattered paint slamming across the canvas. Carlos's view of his circumstance reeled by in slow motion, like a film made from stop-action photography, ran back slightly, sped up, but just below real-life time. It was dizzying and cost him far more strength and energy than he would have imagined. He sucked desperately for air in long drawn-out breaths as his world began to wind down like a music box, slowing to its halting death, one slow-motion note after the other until the last one struggled to complete its tone before going silent. Blood was everywhere, the walls being spattered in red like the artist's canvas, the floors wet and slippery, Carlos's hands and knees sliding as he slowly wound down onto the floor. He dropped the blade the minute he saw Dr. Niles' blank stare as his head lay parallel to the floor in a growing puddle of red that smelled of dank rust. His hands becoming gummy as the liquid life source began coagulating on his skin to a semi-dry sticky paste. He felt a sting in his lip and reached up to wipe it away, but instead tasted the sharp, salty, bitter tingle of human blood. His stomach fought the instant heaves gut deep as his muscles attempted to vomit bile up from his intestines. He was spent, his eyes growing foggy, his breath fading to slowing, wispy gasps.
Oh, my fucking God!
Cracked through the bleak quiet of room 3, now filled with the raw stench of death. Barbie held no clue how fast a pooling pond of blood could release a sickening odor. The sight of all the red against the white was overwhelming, let alone the quickly bluing face of Doc Niles, frozen in the exact moment he had expired. It was thoroughly haunting as the whimpering female sighs began growing into screams of acknowledgement from the witnessed horror that had just taken place center ring of the stage. The master of ceremony now curled up on the floor of the show with an audience of only 2, Karen and Barbie. Oh, the other voices began speaking up after the shock began to cool, but they all slipped from the lips of the man who killed the man behind the curtain. The great Oz. Dr. J. Niles lay in a puddle of liquid like the Wicked Witch of the West, only it had taken more than just a bucket of water for Dorothy to lead her to her expiration.
I've never seen anything so fucking horrible!
Barbie pushed from her lips. Carlos's head turned up to meet Barbie's and Karen's broken gaze, but Karen was quick to see that Carlos had again left the building, leaving one of the others in his place.
Rob? Is that you?
Karen stuttered, still swallowed up in the frightening moment.
I can't. Are you okay? Are you bleeding anywhere?
Her voice quaked and broke into tones not fitting her. She sounded like a teen who cracked and screeched occasionally from overpowering hormone changes.
I have to get out of here.
Barbie broke the odd moment growing between Karen and Rob.
I think I'm gonna be...
And then the sound of spewing vomit filled the room along with an odor that was very unnatural and followed by coughs and choking, along with spit sounds. She coughed and choked another time or two before continuing.
Oh, God. I'm sorry. I got it.
And Barbie turned and attempted to quickly leave, but instead her heels slid in the moisture that seeped underneath her feet. She spilled to the ground with a thud and groan before the tears and whimpers overtook and echoed through the hollow silence in the room. Karen pulled her gaze from Barbie and back to whom she believed was Rob, still on the floor, but attempting to overpower his spent body and push himself up towards a seated position.
Rob? It is you, isn't it? Is Carlos gone?
The man's face tilted up to meet Karen's.
He's gone. Left the scene of the crime. And of course, me holding the bag. Of course. Motherfucker.
But through his quiet voice mixed with exhaustion and tepid humor, his mouth widened into that very familiar Cheshire grin.
The Wicked Witch is dead. The Tin Man with the dark soul killed him with his axe before becoming the Cowardly Lion and running.
Karen smiled back.
I'll be your Dorothy, Rob, if you'll be my scarecrow. You big old brainless hunk.
That's me, babe. Just another machinist with some crazy friends that used to hang around.
And Izabella. Is she still in there?
Rob's eyes rolled upward and then his head followed in a small circle as if he were searching the interior walls of his brain. His gaze fell once more upon Karen and their eyes connected.
I'm not sure. She can be very evasive at times.
Karen said curiously.
I guess I've always wondered how thruples live together.
Rob smiled mischievously.
I'm game to give it a try if she shows up at some point. You?
Count me in. Baby doll, I've always kissed lips and licked lollipops.
She winked and gave an evil grin.
But I could always try it the other way.
And she blew him a kiss as she slinked over to her man and kneeled down beside him, her hand reaching for his chin and pulling him into a kiss. As their lips met, her hand began traveling downward towards the zipper of his trousers.
Oh, Lord. Get a fucking room for 3.
And Barbie choked again before spewing on the floor once more, coughing and choking all the way down the hallway until the glass entry door banged closed and silence filled the office. Minutes later, the last thing heard was Karen's voice screaming.
Oh, Robbie. Oh my God. Do it. Do it, baby. Yeah.
And the scene closed to the sound of slapping skin.